We've had to rethink the history of technology completely as a result of this single object. It's such a clever, extraordinary, sophisticated machine.
In 1901, divers off the coast of a tiny Greek island pulled something from the sea that still confuses historians today, a corroded lump of bronze. Nothing special, or so they thought. But inside that mess of rust and gears was a machine so advanced, so impossibly intricate, that when scientists finally understood what it did, they realized it shouldn't exist. Not for another 1,000 years at least. For over a century we've asked who made it. Now modern science is giving us answers in the strangest way possible.
Modern technology has vastly advanced what we know about the mechanism.
And when we first looked at the results, showed us all these new inscriptions, came the discovery that it predicted eclipses, that it followed the variable motion of the moon.
The shipwreck that rewrote history. The island of Antikythera sits between mainland Greece and Crete, a small rocky dot in the Aegean Sea. In the spring of 1900, a group of sponge divers took shelter there during a storm. When the weather cleared, they went down to explore the sea floor. What they found was extraordinary. A massive shipwreck scattered across the seabed, filled with bronze statues, marble sculptures, luxury pottery, and coins. It was a treasure trove. The Greek government immediately organized a recovery mission. Over the next year, divers hauled up statue after statue, marble arms, bronze legs, amphorae still sealed, jewelry, glassware. This wasn't just any wreck, it was a merchant vessel probably traveling from the eastern Mediterranean toward Rome, loaded with the finest goods of the Hellenistic world. The ship likely sank around 70 to 60 BCE, caught in a storm or driven onto the rocks. But among all that treasure, one object stood out. Or rather, it didn't stand out at all. It was a lump, crusted with marine life, corroded beyond recognition, split into fragments. The divers didn't even know what it was. Some thought it might be a rock. Others guessed it was part of a statue base. It got labeled, catalogued, and mostly ignored. Then, months later, as the artifacts dried in storage, something strange happened. The lump cracked open. Inside were gears, dozens of them, interlocking bronze wheels, some no bigger than a coin, with teeth so precisely cut they could have come from a clockmaker's workshop. But this thing was over 2,000 years old. Clocks didn't exist yet. Machines like this didn't exist yet. At least, that's what everyone thought. A computer before computers existed. The device that came out of that shipwreck is now called the Antikythera mechanism. It's about the size of a shoebox, though only fragments survive today. When intact, it would have been housed in a wooden case with bronze dials on the front and back, covered in tiny inscriptions. You could turn a crank on the side and the gears inside would rotate, moving pointers across those dials. It wasn't decorative, it was functional, a machine built to calculate. What did it calculate? Almost everything you need to know about the sky. The position of the sun and moon, the phases of the moon, the timing of eclipses, years in advance, the movements of the planets, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, all 5 known to the ancient Greeks. The mechanism even tracked the ancient Olympic Games, which followed a 4-year cycle. It was an astronomical calculator, a calendar, a predictor of celestial events. In modern terms, it was an analog computer. The engineering is staggering. The device contains at least 30 bronze gears, possibly more that have been lost. Some of these gears are differential gears, a type of mechanism that wasn't seen again in historical records until medieval Islamic engineers reinvented them over 1,000 years later. The teeth on the gears are triangular, cut with incredible precision. The largest gear has over 200 teeth, the smallest just a handful. They interlock in layers, forming a complex, 3-dimensional system that models the irregular motions of celestial bodies. And here's the thing, the ancient Greeks didn't think in terms of gears and mechanics the way we do. Their mathematics was advanced, their astronomy was sophisticated, but building a physical machine to model the cosmos, that required a completely different kind of knowledge. Metalworking, precision engineering, an understanding of gear ratios and mechanical advantage. Whoever made this wasn't just a philosopher, they were a craftsman, a technician, someone who could translate abstract astronomical theory into bronze and motion. The problem no one could solve. For decades after its discovery, the Antikythera mechanism was a mystery no one could crack. Early researchers knew it was important, but they couldn't figure out how it worked. The fragments were too corroded, too fragmented. X-rays in the 1970s revealed more gears, but the images were blurry, hard to interpret. It wasn't until the 2000s, when scientists used advanced imaging techniques like computed tomography, that the full complexity became clear. But even then, questions remained. Who built it? Where was it made? Was this a one-off masterpiece, or did the ancient Greeks produce many of these devices? If they did, where are the others? Why is this the only one we've ever found? The mechanism contains over 3,000 characters of ancient Greek text, tiny inscriptions etched into the bronze. These aren't decorations, they're instructions, a user manual. The text describes the dials, the cycles, how to interpret the readings. Some of the language points to specific regions. Corinth, maybe. Or Rhodes, an island famous in antiquity for its astronomers and engineers. Some scholars think it could have been made in Syracuse, the city of Archimedes, the greatest engineer of the ancient world. But none of this is confirmed. The metal itself offers clues. Bronze is an alloy, a mixture of copper and tin, sometimes with traces of other elements. The exact composition can hint at where the raw materials came from. Certain regions had distinctive bronze recipes, but the Antikythera mechanism's bronze has been analyzed, and it doesn't give a clear answer. It's consistent with several possible sources. Cyprus, the Levant, mainland Greece, the trail goes cold. And then there's the bigger question. Why don't we have records of this technology? The Greeks wrote about everything: philosophy, mathematics, medicine, engineering, yet nowhere in the surviving texts is there a description of a machine like this. No blueprint, no mention of a workshop that made them. It's as if this entire branch of knowledge existed in a bubble, then vanished. DNA in bronze, how modern science reads ancient secrets. So how does DNA come into this? The mechanism is made of metal. Bronze doesn't have DNA, but it turns out metal can trap biological material. And modern science has gotten very, very good at finding it. When the Antikythera mechanism was built, it wasn't just gears floating in space, it was housed in a wooden case. That wood has long since rotted away, but microscopic fragments can remain embedded in the corrosion layers. Wood has DNA. If scientists can extract and sequence that DNA, they can identify the tree species. And different tree species grow in different regions. That tells you something about where the mechanism might have been made, or at least where its case was constructed, but it goes further. Ancient craftsmen used organic materials in their work. Animal glues to bond parts together, beeswax to lubricate gears, plant oils to polish metal. All of these leave traces, tiny amounts of biological residue invisible to the naked eye but detectable with modern molecular techniques. When you sequence that DNA, you're not just identifying a species, you're building a picture of the workshop, the materials, the methods. And there's another source, human DNA. When you handle metal, you leave traces, skin cells, sweat. If the mechanism passed through many hands, you might find DNA from multiple people. If it was crafted by a small specialized workshop, you might find DNA from just a few individuals. In some cases, scientists have even identified familial relationships in ancient DNA, suggesting that certain crafts were passed down through families. The shipwreck itself is a goldmine of biological information. The mechanism spent over 2,000 years underwater. During that time, sediment accumulated around it. Marine organisms colonized it. Microbes broke down organic material. All of that leaves a record. By analyzing the DNA trapped in the corrosion, researchers can reconstruct the environment the mechanism came from before it sank. Was it kept in a dry room, a humid one, near the sea, inland? These details matter. What the biological traces revealed. Recent analysis of the Antikythera mechanism has focused on extracting and studying these biological traces. The results are not yet fully published, but preliminary findings are starting to emerge, and they're surprising. First, the wood. Microscopic fragments embedded in the bronze corrosion have been analyzed. The DNA suggests a species of boxwood, a dense hardwood prized in antiquity for fine craftsmanship. Boxwood doesn't grow everywhere. It's native to the Mediterranean, but specific varieties are associated with certain regions. The type found in the mechanism is consistent with trees from the eastern Mediterranean, not mainland Greece. Further east, the Levant, possibly. or coastal Anatolia. This suggests that either the mechanism was built in that region or its case was constructed there. Then there's the glue. Traces of animal-based adhesive have been detected in joints between components. The DNA is degraded, but enough remains to identify it as probably derived from cattle. Cattle glue was common in the ancient world, but the specific preparation, the way it was processed, varied by region. The chemical signature here points to a method used in Hellenistic Egypt and the Near East, not the Greek mainland. Human DNA is trickier. Contamination is a huge problem. Modern handlers, researchers, museum staff all leave their genetic fingerprints. But by comparing DNA samples and filtering out known modern contamination, scientists have identified at least 2 distinct ancient human genetic profiles on the mechanism. This suggests it was handled by multiple people in antiquity. Were they the builders, the users, the merchants who packed it onto the ship? Hard to say. But it confirms the mechanism had a history before it sank. The microbial DNA is where things get really interesting. Marine bacteria colonized the mechanism after it sank. But some of the bacterial DNA trapped inside the corrosion is terrestrial, not marine. These are species that live in soil and on plants. That means they were already on the mechanism when it went into the water, and their distribution, the specific mix of species, is consistent with a semi-arid coastal environment. Again, Eastern Mediterranean, not the wetter, greener landscapes of mainland Greece, the workshop that history forgot. Putting all these clues together paints a picture that challenges the traditional story. For a long time, scholars assumed the Antikythera mechanism was made in Greece proper. Rhodes, Corinth, maybe Syracuse, but the biological evidence suggests it might have come from further east, a Hellenistic workshop in the Levant or perhaps on the coast of what is now Turkey. This makes sense in a broader historical context. After Alexander the Great's conquests, Greek culture spread across the Eastern Mediterranean and into Asia. Greek became the common language of science and learning. Greek engineers and craftsmen worked in cities far from Greece itself. Alexandria in Egypt became a center of innovation, home to the famous library and scholars like Euclid and Archimedes. Pergamon in Anatolia had its own great library and a thriving intellectual community. Antioch in Syria was a major Hellenistic city. Any of these places could have housed a workshop capable of producing the Antikythera mechanism. In fact, some historians now think that the device wasn't a Greek invention in the narrow sense. It was a product of the broader Hellenistic world, a fusion of Greek astronomical theory, Near Eastern observational traditions, and the kind of precision metalworking that required access to resources and expertise from across the region. But here's the problem: we have no direct evidence of such a workshop, no ruins, no tools, no other machines. The Antikythera mechanism is unique. If there was a tradition of making these devices, it left almost no trace. Why? One possibility is that these machines were rare and valuable, not mass-produced, but commissioned by wealthy patrons, kings maybe, or powerful merchants. Devices like this would have been expensive, requiring months or years of skilled labor. If only a handful were ever made, and if they were kept in private collections, it's no surprise we haven't found more. Most would have been melted down for their bronze or lost in disasters like the Antikythera shipwreck. Another possibility is that the knowledge was closely guarded. In the ancient world, technical expertise was often passed down within families or small guilds. If the makers of the mechanism formed a tight-knit group, and if that group was disrupted by war, plague, or economic collapse, the knowledge could vanish in a generation. No written records, no apprentices to carry on the tradition, just a few beautiful machines scattered and forgotten. Why this technology vanished? The disappearance of the Antikythera mechanism's technology is one of the great puzzles of ancient history. The device dates to around 100 to 150 BCE. After that, nothing. The Roman Empire, which absorbed the Greek world, produced no comparable machines. Medieval Europe had nothing like it. The next time we see gear-driven astronomical devices, it's in the Islamic world around the 9th century CE, and even those are simpler. So what happened? Part of the answer is cultural. The Romans admired Greek learning, but they were more practical. They built aqueducts, roads, siege engines, machines that did obvious, useful work. An astronomical calculator, that was a curiosity. Impressive, sure, but not something you could use to conquer provinces or feed a city. Roman engineering went in a different direction. There's also the question of resources. Building a device like the Antikythera mechanism required not just skill, but time and money, a stable, wealthy society that valued abstract knowledge. The late Hellenistic period, when the mechanism was made, was such a time. But the Roman civil wars, the shifting of power, the economic pressures of empire, all of this could have disrupted the networks that supported such specialized craftsmanship. And then there's loss. We only have a tiny fraction of ancient texts. Entire libraries burned, papyrus rotted, parchment was scraped clean and reused. It's entirely possible that detailed descriptions of how to build these machines existed, and we just don't have them anymore. We know the ancient Greeks wrote technical manuals. Heron of Alexandria, for example, described all sorts of clever devices, but many of his works are lost. If someone wrote a manual for the Antikythera mechanism, it didn't survive. The missing link in ancient engineering, what makes the Antikythera mechanism so unsettling, is that it doesn't fit. It's too advanced for its time, but not in a magical way. It's not alien technology or anything absurd. It's human engineering, brilliant human engineering, but it implies a continuity of knowledge we don't have evidence for. Where did the makers learn to cut gears so precisely? Who taught them? Was there a chain of master craftsmen stretching back generations, refining techniques, passing down secrets? Some researchers have speculated that the tradition goes back to Archimedes, who lived in the 3rd century BCE, about 100 years before the mechanism was made. Ancient writers mention that Archimedes built devices to model the heavens. Cicero, the Roman statesman, described seeing one, a sphere that showed the motions of the sun, moon, and planets. Could the Antikythera mechanism be a descendant of Archimedes' inventions? It's possible. Syracuse, where Archimedes lived, was sacked by the Romans in 212 BCE. Many of his works were lost, but ideas spread. Students carry on their teachers' work even in exile. The biological evidence hints at this kind of transmission. If the mechanism was made in the Eastern Mediterranean, it suggests that Greek engineering knowledge didn't stay in Greece. It traveled, it mixed with other traditions. The gears in the astronomy are Greek, but the materials and methods show a wider network. This is the missing link. Not a single inventor, but a web of craftsmen, patrons, traders, and scholars spread across the Hellenistic world, sharing knowledge in ways we can barely reconstruct. And maybe that's the real lesson of the Antikythera mechanism. History isn't a straight line. Knowledge doesn't accumulate neatly. Sometimes entire branches of expertise flourish and die, leaving only faint traces. Sometimes we find a piece of the past so remarkable, it forces us to rethink everything we thought we knew. The biological traces trapped in that corroded bronze are more than just scientific curiosities. They're threads, fragile and incomplete, connecting us to a lost world. A world where someone somewhere sat in a workshop and filed bronze gears by hand, one tooth at a time, trying to capture the heavens in a box. We may never know their name, but thanks to the DNA they left behind, we're finally starting to understand where they worked, what they used, and just how far their knowledge reached.